A power-sharing deal has finally been reached in Sudan between the ruling military council and an alliance of opposition groups after weeks of negotiations and deadly protests. The two sides signed the document after intense overnight talks in the capital, Khartoum. Media sources indicate the 22-clause accord says that an 11-member governing body will rule the country for just over 3 years, after which elections will be held. This transitional power-sharing body will have a total of 6 civilians, including 5 from the Forces of Freedom and Change Party and 5 soldiers from the Transitional Military Council.
Exactly, Lynette. This step towards democracy was welcomed by French President Emmanuel Macron, who congratulated Ethiopia and the African Union for the role they played in easing the situation. However, there are some questions that remain unanswered. The protesters have called for those responsible for repression to be tried, as well as the question of creation of the transitional parliament and the withdrawal of the militia still present in Khartoum and in the cities still waiting to be resolved.
Well, joining us to talk about this is Joshua Marsave. He specializes in African geopolitics, counterterrorism, and refugee policy, and is a senior policy analyst for Africa and the Middle East at the Heritage Foundation. Joshua, thank you very much for joining us today. So even after tense negotiations, it appears that the military still has an upper hand in all this. Do you have the same feeling?
I do, yes. If you look at the various ministries that got divided up, the military retains the defense portfolio and the interior portfolio, which are two critical ones, of course. And it also gives the TMC, the Transitional Military Council, a longer time at the head of the ruling body, which will rule the country during the interim period. So a general will head it for 21 months, and then a civilian will follow the general and rule for 18 months. So I have always been skeptical of these deals because I think that the military will do whatever it takes to retain power and control, and that means in this context that they have agreed to a deal that they think will allow them to retain all the control they need.
So how critical are the next steps going to be, and are 3 years enough to set up credible elections, do you think?
I think the next 3 years will be very critical because I expect that, again, that the military will use those 3 years to ensure that any elections, if we even get there, two elections, will go their way. So they will either stack the relevant electoral bodies, or they will intimidate the opposition, or something. They'll manage some way to rig the system, so to speak, to ensure that they are not voted out of power once the elections come, or they'll just manage some way to ensure that elections don't happen at all if they view them as a threat to their power. So yes, the next 3 years will determine whether the military can be successful in doing that. To prevent them from achieving their goals, it will take an extraordinary coalition of international partners to exert great pressure, to be very, very engaged on this. And even then, I'm not sure if that would be enough.
And looking at the aftermath of the protests, Joshua, what becomes of the leaders who would find themselves linked to criminal activities, including criminal cases, including corruption and mismanagement of the country? How will they ensure that justice is served?
It's going to be extraordinarily difficult. This was one of the sticking points between the civilians and the military. The protest leaders were demanding that there be some sort of mechanism installed that would deliver justice for particularly what happened, some associated with the protest movement, but even beyond that. But of course, the people, the generals in charge of the Transitional Military Council, I'm speaking particularly of the deputy here, who his nickname is Hameti. He runs the Rapid Support Forces, which is a militia that comes out of Darfur, where it was credibly accused of all sorts of atrocities. Hameti himself was almost certainly the person who ordered some of the crackdowns that ended in so much bloodshed, for which the civilians are now demanding justice. So as long as Hameti has any sort of power, real justice will not be delivered, because he will ensure that he does not end up before The Hague or before some sort of court where he might be in danger of winding up in prison. It's just simply not on the table for him. So getting real justice is going to be an extraordinarily difficult task.